This is episode 672 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing, president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. I am very pleased to be joined by Representative John Block. John is also the proprietor of the Pinon Post, an online politics and news journal right here in New Mexico. And before I bring John on, I'll just say that he is consistently one of the very, very best scoring members of the legislature in the Rio Grande Foundation's Freedom Index. And we're going to be previewing the upcoming legislative session. So welcome to Tipping Point, or welcome back to Tipping Point, New Mexico, John.
It's great to be back. It's great to talk with you every time that we have a new episode with you. And it's crazy how you're at what, 672 episodes already.
I know. Yes, we've
How do
been
you
at
do
it for a
that?
while, and keep plugging away, hoping that everybody in New Mexico listens. Because, gosh darn it, this last election really was a kick in the pants in terms of New Mexico kind of just going status quo, while the country embraced a bit of a more pro-freedom approach. And before we get into issues in the legislature and your work as a representative, and this is your second term, right, in the House?
It is. I'm
Oh,
excited.
so
I'm
you're,
now
you're
not a freshman anymore. I don't know what I'm called, but I know I'm not a freshman.
yeah, they'll no longer be putting "kick me" signs on you or in the Just kidding. I never saw any
I'm
legis
sure they will continue that. Yeah.
Just because you're a conservative Republican, maybe you'll have to defend yourself a little more than others. But before we get into all that, uh, talk about your opinion post and how you kind of got into that, and what that site is supposed to represent and do.
You bet. Well, like you and I both know, we don't have a lot of conservative news in New Mexico. It's kind of dry in that area. And so a few years ago, actually it was about 2016, I started writing blog opinion posts. And so I started doing that on a website that I started called John for New Mexico. And from that, I thought in 2020, we decided to move it to an actual mainstream news site and have conservative opinion as well as just right down the middle news. And we did a lot of exclusive reporting during COVID, especially with all of the mandates and everything that happened. And it just kind of exploded from there because I think conservatives in the state realized we cannot just rely on the television news. We can't just rely on the two big papers in both the metro areas of northern and central New Mexico, Albuquerque and Santa Fe, and they needed a new voice. So that's pretty much why I came into this and decided, you know what, we need some actual real journalism for the conservatives in the state because some of these topics don't really get the coverage they need, especially if you look at the Journal or you look at the New Mexican. Some of these articles they just won't let print. So that's why we're here, and also to bring conservatives an opinion voice. So if you have an opinion that may be off the wall, maybe on the wall, maybe great, maybe crazy, doesn't matter. We're going to give you that platform. And so we're trying to be uncancelable. That's kind of what we're doing in the last few years to try to harness ourselves as an uncancelable news, opinion, and just general politics website for New Mexicans. So we can't be taken down by the Twitters and the X's or whatever. I think they're pretty good now, right now, but Facebooks and stuff. So we're trying to just be uncancelable, be a real news site for all New Mexicans.
Yeah, and I would say, not to toot our own horns there, John, but if you read the Pinion Post and heirsoфenchantment.com, and frequently you cover our stuff, and sometimes I find great articles on your site that I write about or talk about in our various platforms. Those are two of the best ways to stay informed about what's really happening in the land of enchantment. So I encourage folks to check out both of those sites, Pinon Post. I know there's a few different ways people might spell opinion. Thankfully, the inye on the in is not a requirement. You don't get sent to the wrong place by not including the inye. That would be a mess because
Yeah, you can just Google it too. I mean, if
there you go.
people they spell it as everything Pinon and PI two N's, and People spell it crazily, but thankfully our SEO is probably good enough that if you just look us up, you'll find us. We'll be one of the top things to find.
Exactly. All right. Well, let's move into the legislative session. Of course, the long 60-day session, the swan song for Lujan Grisham. She's officially a lame duck at this point. Nobody's ever going to rely on her for reelection prospects. I mean, they may ask for her endorsement as she heads out the door in the gubernatorial race, but she's effectively in this session, beginning her lame duck tenure as governor. But this is the 60-day session still where it's it's open season. Anything can happen in these sessions. It may only be 60 days, but sometimes it feels like 120 days up there. And of course, they really work you guys late into the night in those last several weeks. But kind of give us the 50,000-foot perspective on where you see this session going. What are some of the big kind of broad issues that will be discussed and are influencing the New Mexico legislature?
Sure. Well, I think first of all, we need to talk about the shifting demographics of who's actually in the legislature to be able to talk about what we can pass, what we can kill. So on the Republican side, we got one seat. So Rebecca Dow, our former representative, has come back as our new representative in southern New Mexico, kind of near where I am. And so she is back in the legislature. So we're at 26 seats out of 70. So that means it could mean that we could get a seat somewhere in one of the committees, which could help when killing bills. It also could mean that we could have a little better opportunity to kill legislation on the floor that's very bad. So one thing that I know is coming back for certain is the Paid Family and Medical Leave Act, which failed by, I believe, 2 votes last legislative session. And so that legislation was horrible when it comes to small businesses because they'd be forced to pay into this big pool of money that they would have to give free paid time off, a large amount of time off to people. And it could even extend to if, let's just say, their second cousin was sick or something, they could use that to take off, I believe it was something between 12 or 20 something days. And so when it comes to this large amount of time that they wouldn't be working, that employer would have to make up for that by getting temporary workers or a job that you can't get a temp for. You just have to go without or do it yourself. So those are kind of a big issue that we're going to have to look out for. And so it all depends on where that bill is sent to in committees to get to the floor. With the tight minority that we have and the few Democrats that voted with us to kill the bill, I believe 3 or 4 of those members are no longer coming back. I say 3 or 4 because Representative Harry Garcia, who was a moderate, he has been nominated to fill a seat left vacant by Representative Alcon over in Milan. And so that seat could maybe go to a more moderate, more common sense Democrat, or it could stay just vacant. But either one of those options is probably good for us because if it's vacant, that's one less Democrat vote they have that's a yes. And if it's not vacant and we have a more moderate Democrat in that seat, it means he could potentially vote with us like he voted with us last time on the Paid Family and Medical Leave Act. So I think that if we have enough members, I think we would probably need to pick up one more vote to vote with us on the floor. We could kill that bill. But that's probably the biggest issue that we have to look for in this next session because it's the most horrendous to small businesses and it would really hurt the bottom line.
Let's take a closer look at that Harry Garcia issue, if you would, for a second. And obviously, as a Republican, you have limited ability to influence that situation, but the Pinon Post and the Heirs of Enchantment, we can certainly write about it and discuss it here in this format. As you mentioned, Harry Garcia was one of the moderates who kind of helped stand up against the governor, or we presume that the governor supports paid family leave. Ultimately, we don't know for sure, but the paid family leave in the last session and a handful of other issues. Now, Eliseo Alcon won re-election, but ultimately had to resign due to health-related issues. He was not a political moderate. He was a left-wing progressive, as his votes showed. Garcia had been defeated in a different district in New Mexico, a neighboring district, apparently has some kind of property or house in the district that he's talking about running in, District 6. He has been nominated by both counties. Now, the process is for an open seat that if there's two counties or three counties, those county commissions nominate somebody. So he secured the nomination from both counties. Maggie Toulouse, all over the Secretary of State, says she's unable to investigate Garcia's residence and where he lives, whether he lives in the district. Lujan Grisham says she doesn't want to nominate Garcia because she says publicly that she doesn't think he lives in the district. I think we really believe, maybe you can correct me if you think I'm mistaken, but I think it's really more of an ideological thing with her that she doesn't want to put Garcia in there because he's opposed to some of those left-wing principles. I realize this is getting very arcane into New Mexico policy, but
Yeah.
any handicapping of where this thing's going to go? It's tough for the governor to just say, essentially, screw you to these two county commissions, McKinley and Siebel, I believe, and do her own thing. It really sets in motion a potential constitutional crisis in a sense.
I think it does, and I think it shows where the governor is willing to push her authority and where she's not. She's perfectly happy to unilaterally sign away the Second Amendment rights of every single human being who lives in Albuquerque, but she is not inclined to seat somebody who has dual residences in a district where they pretty much live on the side of. They do live in both, apparently, according to what I've read. And so, of course, this is an ideological thing. I know the governor, she would hate to appoint him, but also she may hate to not appoint him because I don't know if he votes with her on certain other issues that she needs the votes for that are not super hot topic. So it could depend on what the legislators want on the Democrat side. It could mean that the majority leader and the speaker could want him, or maybe they just want to leave it open for I don't know how long, but I'm not sure what the Constitution says about how long it will take to fill a gap in a seat. If that's left open for 2 straight years, that could potentially be a problem. Or maybe it'll be filled in the next few months after session, or maybe before. It's hard to say. But numbers wise, we still lost a lot of other moderates. So we lost him, and he could be coming back, Representative Garcia. We lost Representative Allison, who decided to retire, and he was replaced by a far left extremist progressive. We lost Representative Willie Madrid down in Chaparral, and he was primaried by a far left extremist who then passed away in office. And then the Democrat Party appointed a new person to run in that seat, and that new person, her name's Silva, she won by the skin of her teeth, and that was maybe 200 votes. And so she's going to be seated there. We have another far left extremist radical socialist being seated there. And I believe we lost one more moderate, I forget. But since that vote was so tight, 2 votes, we could only afford to lose one of those people. And I think we're right there on the edge to maybe getting a tie vote, which does mean it dies because it doesn't pass. But that's too close for comfort, in my opinion. So we will see if Representative Garcia gets reappointed to the legislature.
Ambrose Castellano, that is
That's the one. Yeah, Ambrose was primaried by a far left extremist progressive. And also another point that is really important that I think we need to hit on. I think Representative Stephanie Lord, she tweeted about it the other day, or X posted about it. I hate the word X posted, just tweet is what I'm going to use. But
that's fine.
The governor, she has been primarying all these moderates for years. She primaried a bunch of senators back in I think it was 2018. She primaried a bunch of senators in 2020, and she was successful. She took out John Arthur Smith. She took out a bunch of other Mary Kay Papin, people who were moderate Democrats. She took them out, and they would have voted for her crime agenda. And she's been going around the state lately, the governor, talking about crime and how her current majorities in the Senate and the House refuse to address crime, is what she keeps saying. Republicans have come to Santa Fe for years, decades, trying to fix the crime epidemic. But now that she's a lame duck, she doesn't have anything to lose. She's now going to try to pass her crime agenda. She had her failed special session where we didn't pass any crime agenda whatsoever. She is now going across the state in places where I don't know why tomorrow she's coming here to Alamogordo. Good luck with that, to talk to us about crime. And so her radical progressives who she's been installing in these seats, they hate her crime agenda. They do not want to put criminals in jail. They do not want to put any kind of restrictions on felons and people who have done things that are extremely bad, like drug dealers, murderers, rapists. She wants to have tougher penalties, she says, but her majorities don't want that. And since they're all made up of these graduates of this thing called Emerge New Mexico, which is a radical far left out of state DC group that essentially grooms women to run for office and run on an extremist platform of abortion up to birth and hating prisons, wanting to open prisons, things like that. So these people who have now been installed, thanks to the governor and her allies at Emerge, are now giving her a dilemma. Does she want to pass a crime agenda, or does she want to pass extremist left-wing social ideas, such as this Paid Family and Medical Leave Act? And so the governor is very triggered and angered by these people who won't want to pass any crime bills, but she also does have the votes, honestly and unfortunately, to pass some of these radical social progressive kinds of initiatives.
Well, let's talk about the crime situation there. We saw the governor attempt to bring the legislature back in July to address crime. Now, she obviously did not get her plans, her bills that she wanted. I'd be interested in your take on whether anything that she proposed or that you hear that she is proposing for this upcoming legislative session, if you think any of those would be effective. Because, it's one thing to call the legislature back, it's one thing to have the progressives not like what you're doing, but it's another thing entirely to actually effectuate a change when it comes to crime. Do you side with the guy? I know that might cause you to throw up a little bit in your mouth there, John, but do you side with the governor on her actual policies, or just the fact that we need to address crime? And I'm sorry for the graphic explanation there, but I think it was justified.
Well, from what I've read, I don't see anything that she's put forward being effective. Right now, the problem that we have is, number one, our district attorney's offices are horribly understaffed and they don't have the resources to prosecute a lot of these horrible cases. And especially now, with this crime exploding across the state, including in Bernalillo County mostly, and across the state, we have things that we haven't seen before. We have fentanyl on the streets. A couple days ago, there was a news article about a 14-year-old being trafficked for sex in Albuquerque. And the only reason this kid was found was because Albuquerque Raw, which is actually a really good site, they report on crime. They had a story about all these prostitutes stark naked on the street. I think it was on Central and I forget what the cornering street was, but they reported on this. And since they reported on this, the police actually did their jobs, found out what they had, because these people, they're really spread thin. We don't have enough police on the street. We don't have enough district attorneys. We don't have enough anything. So these police, they looked at this article, I assume, found this situation and found that a 14-year-old was being trafficked for sex in Albuquerque, downtown Albuquerque. So the governor's plans are, in my opinion, very rudimentary, maybe even elementary in the process. She wants to increase penalties, which I agree. I think we need to increase penalties for felonies, violent felonies. We need to increase them, period. End of story. She also wants to focus on guns, and I don't think that's okay. I don't think that we need to be attacking people's Second Amendment rights in any way. She's tried that via executive order and failed because it was just so blatantly unconstitutional. Even a Biden-appointed judge would not uphold it. She wants to ban panhandling, which is an interesting take, but I've seen court cases from across the state and the country where it shows it could work, it couldn't work, or it could be struck down because it could be made unconstitutional in some cases. So I think her agenda's half baked is what it is. Republicans, we've come to Santa Fe. Let's have increased penalties for killing people if it's fentanyl. Let's ensure that we protect border communities. Let's put more law enforcers on the street, and things that actually could have a tangible effect, we've put forward. But every single time that we've put forward these very common sense solutions, they've died. Even a Democrat bill from 2023, Representative Cynthia Borrego, Representative Art de la Cruz, and Representative Joseph Sanchez, all three Democrats, they put forward a bill that would have increased penalties if you were a repeat offender of carjacking. This died on a party vote in the committee I sit on, Consumer and Public Affairs in the House, because the radical far left Democrats from Emerge and the governor supported ones, they voted against it. So we can't get change. We can't pass crime legislation if we just don't have the numbers. What they have to do, in my opinion, if you want to pass these bills, you need to ram them through however the hell you need to. Just the way they rammed through all the marijuana bill that was also half baked, no pun intended. So the way I see it is you need to channel these bills instead of going to Consumer and Public Affairs so that they can go die, because it's the most partisan committee in the entire legislature. Maybe send it to a more common sense committee, like maybe I don't know, commerce or maybe tax or something that people actually have to use an analytical mind for, instead of just sending it to a partisan hackery committee where we just have four extremist far left liberals from Las Cruces, Santa Fe, and Albuquerque, and that could potentially be a good thing. So I don't know if the speaker would do that, but I would urge him, if you want to actually address crime, maybe don't send your bills to go die in a committee where there's far left emerged graduates.
Yeah, good points. All right, let's switch gears a little bit. Of course, you are in your second term, as we got at the outset. You're in the Republican Party, which means you're in the distinct minority, and so you can't just wave your magic wand and reduce or eliminate the personal income tax as we would like to see happen. But what are some of the priorities that you have? Bills that you're going to introduce? Anything you're excited about to see the possibility of actually moving through the legislative process this year, this session?
Sure. Well, there's a few bills that I think are actually passable, I guess you could say, with the current numbers. And I hate to say that because some of the things I really care about, they just don't have the numbers for. So there's a bill that I put forward in 2023 with Representative Mirabal Moya. She's from Belen area. And it's a bill that would make a tax credit for micro businesses on their GRT, and it would hold locals harmless. So it wouldn't touch counties, cities, but it would all take it from the state portion. And that would really help these startups in New Mexico, like a food truck, for example, or if you're starting up any kind of business, it could even be a cannabis business. If it's a micro business and you make a certain level of revenue each year, then you could qualify for this tax credit. And it was very successful. It passed through the Commerce Committee in 2023, but it just didn't get on the agenda in Tax Committee. And we started early, but we had to make some structural changes to it. So when we did, it kind of slowed it down in the process. We brought it back last year, but it was a 30-day, it was not on the call for the governor. So hopefully it'll advance further this year. And that's one bill I actually really want to pass. And it's a tax bill, which I hope you guys would support as well. I don't know what your position on reduction of GRT is. I know that we have to structurally change GRT. It's not great. But I think right now we just need to try to do what we can for the small guy. So that's number one. Another bill that I am putting forward is a harmful materials bill that would ban and it would hold liable companies that host harmful materials that are targeted toward children, and it would protect kids when it comes to the internet. And so that would be something that we're putting forward, and maybe it'll pass, maybe it won't. I'm not sure. It's been successful in other states. And then another bill that I think is very important is a tax-centered bill, and it would put I think it's 3.75% excise tax on renewables, which is just the same amount of tax that we put on oil and gas. And so it's an important step with these multi-billion-dollar investments into the state and $0 being paid in excise tax for the energy produced in the state while we are punitively harming and targeting oil and gas. It is only fair for renewables to pay their fair share because, after all, a lot of that is being shipped off to Arizona, California, and the state of New Mexico is the one that's not really benefiting at all from it. And I've heard the case last time. They said, well, we pay payroll taxes. We pay regular taxes in the state. Yeah, but you do not pay an excise tax. And also look at oil and gas. They're way over-regulated. They have so many other hoops to jump through when it comes to solar and wind. They essentially have carte blanche authority to do whatever the heck they want, and they don't have to pay a single dime in excise tax.
Yeah, well, those are some interesting opportunities, and of course, we support reducing the GRT while, of course, advocating for reform of that tax more broadly. But a lower rate GRT is better than nothing, and I am sure you saw the governor's budget when she put it out uh, at the end of last year. Very disappointing to see no tax reductions whatsoever in that particular budget, despite continued growth in the oil and gas sector.
Exactly. And they've been trying to redefine different pots of money as well. So they tried to redefine our capital outlay money, which meant we got lower money last session. They're trying to redefine what new money actually is this next session. So Lord knows what that means when it comes to dollars actually getting down to the districts where they belong. And in my opinion, when it comes to oil and gas royalties, we need to do like what Alaska does and give a stipend to residents for the excess money that's coming in so that we can spend the money instead of the government to spend the money on our behalf, which at the end of the day, who trusts the government, right? So that's just my opinion. But I think when it comes to the budget, it's 7% higher, her ask from last year. So that's over $10 billion, which it already was. I think it's now 10.7 or 8 now. So I'm not sure what we're going to get from that, but it's a lot of excess spending, a lot of feel good stuff for her party, and it's not a lot of long-term growth wise solutions to actually fix the problems in our state. So I would be very hesitant for anyone to support the budget. In my opinion, I think everyone should vote against the budget. I always do because it's just so full of pork and it's just so horribly made. I think the way that it's compromised, it's really compromising our values as well because they could put some good stuff in there, but there's a lot of bad stuff. And when it comes to education spending, that's one thing I'm really big about. We spend more money on education and programs that may or may not work, and we don't get any solutions from that. We need to only be investing in things that have evidence behind them, things that are proven to work, and things that empower teachers, empower parents especially, and ensure that if a kid is getting taught in the state of New Mexico, then those dollars, they need to make sure that they have a return on investment.
So, how about the $6 billion in unspent capital outlay? We see the roads around New Mexico deteriorating. Um, I know you mentioned capital outlay a little bit ago, and while as an outsider, looking in, I understand the legislators are jealous in their regard for those capital outlay dollars that they can bring home to their districts. But on the other hand, I look at it and say, gosh, we have all this money sitting around. We have half funded projects. We have money just waiting to be used, and we're not using it. So, any thoughts on ways to move some of that money into a more productive approach?
Sure. Well, when I first got elected and I went to my orientation, it was a very interesting thing that they told me about capital outlay, which I think is something every legislator needs to be reminded of. These projects that you fund, you are the one who needs to keep track of them. And it is on you exclusively if these dollars are not spent. So when it comes to that $6 billion in unspent capital outlay, these legislators needed to be very prudent in the way that they spent the money. Because what I do is I fund projects that are shovel ready. That's what I fund mostly. And sometimes I fund with other members like senators, other representatives in the area to fund a bigger project. But what I look for is a project that is shovel ready, that can be funded, and immediately upon those funds being appropriated, they can go into the district. And it usually takes a few months, 4 or 5 months. And so it can actually go to truly completing something. Like in my district, I funded money for the zoo, for a new enclosure on the edge of the zoo. That was built because I saw the money, I made sure it was spent correctly, and we have a tangible result. We have a built fence, period. End of story, it's done. But I think a lot of these projects, I hate to throw different people into the bus, but I know that Bernalillo County is probably a big problem when it comes to capital outlay because they have so many members, they have so many moving parts, so many projects, and there are so many delays and things that go on with a big bureaucracy like a Bernalillo County or a an Albuquerque. So that's one problem. And then also another problem that we have that I've heard because I sit on the Indian Affairs Committee is the Navajo Nation. There's lack of communication with chapter houses and with the presidential office and then with the council. And I think there's just lack of communication. And since New Mexico can't just tell the Navajo Nation, this is how you need to spend the money here, when, now, because there's an argument that these individuals, they shouldn't be able to, once we put the money in there, we shouldn't be able to touch it. There's an argument for that. But I think that that's another problem. And I don't know how much of that $1 billion, $6 billion is there, but I know that there are a lot of stumbling blocks when it comes to these dollars flowing into districts. And I like to just fund projects that are shovel ready so we can get it started once those funds are available and we can start building or start creating or renovating whatever it is the project is. I think that's the most important thing.
All right. Well, any other issues as we get into the last few minutes of our time together? Anything that you think will come up that maybe we haven't seen much about yet, or issues that could really impact things in a positive or negative way in Santa Fe and around the state?
Sure. And I love to be positive. I do. But it's hard to be positive when you see all these terrible bills being sponsored. I think the number one bill that we need to look out for, which I don't know if it has a shot of passing, but it's really scary. It is these buffer zone bills on oil and gas. There's a bill that was pre-filed that I know is going to be introduced because it was pre-filed that would force a 1 mile buffer area around all oil and gas production in the state. And this would just cripple the oil and gas industry, and it would annihilate jobs across the whole state. And we heard a preview of this bill in the Radioactive and Hazardous Materials Committee, and it's going to be detrimental or maybe even catastrophic to the oil and gas industry. So we need to keep an eye out on that because after all of the money that we spend on all these great things or horrible things comes from oil and gas. So if we want to kill the hand that feeds us or bite the hand that feeds us, then that bill would pass. And I hope it doesn't, but that's something we need to keep an eye out for. And especially when it comes to over-regulation of the oil and gas industry, that's going to completely destroy any prospects of a viable future for the state because it's just not doable if we don't have other solutions on top of those to bring in revenues. I've put forward ideas about let's legalize sports betting in the state of New Mexico. Let's do all these other ideas that could help bring money into the state, like, I don't know, taxing renewables. That would create $250 million in new revenue every single year, according to the FIR last time I brought the bill forward, and that would bring money into the state. But I think right now we need to focus on sustainability. We need to put a lot of money in our savings accounts in the state of New Mexico, and we cannot just be spending money that we do not know we'll have in the future.
Well, first and foremost, I think that may be the coolest committee of all in Santa Fe. The Radioactive and Hazardous Materials Committee seems like a pretty fun and interesting committee to sit on. So kudos for that. And by the way, yes, the bill There may be multiple bills, but the one I have pre-filed or seen that's pre-filed is HB 35, Children's Health Protection Zones. And I believe that's Debbie Sarniana is the sponsor on this particular version. Uh, there are a handful of bills that have been pre-filed at this point, and of course, the trickle will become a flood very, very quickly. But that is definitely, and the Legislative Finance Committee did a good job of analyzing the and highlighting the potential harms to the state of New Mexico from that kind of bill. And of course, there's no science to say that any barrier, any buffer zone is needed, certainly not a mile. That is a huge area off limits. So we'll definitely keep an eye on that one and work to oppose it wherever we can. So I appreciate your time today, John. And please, again, share any other information, opinion post, or your legislative website, or any information about how people can reach you.
Yeah, and you too, and thank you again. You can just go to pinonpost.com, pinonpost.com, and I'm going to put a little buffer here and then go back to, as a legislator, you can find my website, nmlegis.gov. That's where you can find me. And you just look up legislators, boom, you got my email there. And you can also email my legislative assistant as well if you need help with anything in district. And yeah, pretty much we just got to stick together this next session. We need to fight hard. And I'm prepared. I'm getting ready with the rules and getting ready with all the amendments I'm doing and all these things that I'm juggling right now. And I know you may not know what's going on in Santa Fe from the outside, because I did, but it's deeper. The swamp is deeper than you would think, but you just got to keep the course. You got to make sure that you show up to those committee hearings and oppose bills that you don't like, support bills that you do like, because people, warm bodies in the audience or even on Zoom, they matter because your voice is more powerful than you would think, especially if there's five of us and there's only one of them. It's kind of harder to vote yes on a bad bill or vote no on a good bill. So I think that's just something to keep in mind. And then just keep reading Errors of Enchantment, the Pinon Post, and other places that you can get real news, real solutions to these problems. And I think together we can make a difference in New Mexico. It may feel like it's a slow process, which it is, but we got to keep the course to save our state.
And just a quick bit of housekeeping. The confusion level will amp up slightly as you are one of now two blocks in the legislature, but you are in the House. Jay Block is in the Senate as a freshman. So make sure to keep those two separate. Two conservative Republicans. I guess Block is we just need to elect another 110 blocks to the legislature and we'll be in great shape. But uh,
Yeah, we have
thanks for
two
your time.
blocks. Yeah, it's great. I love it.
Thanks
We
for your
got
time, and we'll see you up in Santa Fe.
see you there.
All right. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.